Hey, everybody, welcome back to Buried the Podcast. We are going to move on to episode 2. I am your host, Silas Knight. And just to recap for new listeners or anybody that just needs a refresher, this is not a podcast that would typically be considered a true crime podcast. We are not focused on conspiracy theories, the actions of civilians so much as we're going to focus on the choices made by law enforcement, oversights, things that were missed by the coroner's office, medical examiner's offices, and law enforcement alike. A little bit about me, just as a recap. I am a certified medical legal death investigator, currently working as a deputy coroner, and I am not going to tell you where. Now that we've got that refresher in mind, let's move into episode 2. We're going to talk about the death of Rey Rivera. This is a pretty popular one in true crime. One of my first forays into the kind of true crime podcasting world, or getting hooked into podcasts like this, was hearing about Rey Rivera's death. So, in 2006, in Baltimore, Maryland, Rey Rivera was a young writer and newlywed, vanished kind of out of thin air, or into thin air, only to be found dead a few days later under what I and most people would consider bizarre circumstances. This case really tests the limits of investigative procedure, forensic protocol, and really the family's pursuit of truth. There's a lot of unsettling questions. There's a lot of alleged missteps, and we are going to focus on strictly the facts. So, moving into the timeline, this is Baltimore, Maryland, May 16th, 2006, a warm spring evening. Rey Rivera, a 32-year-old aspiring filmmaker and finance writer, is at home in the city's Northwood neighborhood. He and his wife, Allison, had moved here originally from Southern California for Ray's new job writing financial newsletters for his longtime friend, Porter Stansberry. If you're familiar with the story, you kind of know all the allure and weirdness surrounding Porter. So he's a pretty big name in this. So his wife, Allison, is out of town on a business trip. And while she's gone, there's a house guest named Claudia staying over. By all accounts, Claudia reports Ray's in good spirits. He's working on a new screenplay, and he plans to return to Los Angeles with Allison to start a family. Sometime that evening, this is going to be May 16th, he gets a phone call in his home office. Claudia, per her witness account, says that she hears Ray answer it. He says, "Oh shit," in a panicked kind of tone. At least that's what she thinks it is. He bolts out the door, leaves the house lights on, leaves his snack half finished. He takes his keys, his cell phones, maybe a credit card. He's wearing flip-flops, doesn't close the computer, doesn't turn the lights off. Claudia would go on to describe his departure as urgent feeling, like he's late for an appointment. And this would really mark the last time anyone that we know saw Rey Rivera alive. So Allison, same day, tries to call him around 5:30. And then again a little bit later in the night, no answer. At 10 p.m., she gets concerned. She calls Claudia. Claudia checks the house. Ray's not there. His car is gone. It's a black Mitsubishi SUV. And they kind of talk themselves out of the check for well-being. They kind of reassure themselves that he probably just went out with his friends. Maybe he had car trouble. But, he'll be back in the morning. But by May 17th, Ray's still not home. And now, more concerningly, his phone is going straight to voicemail. So Allison obviously starts to get more and more worried. She cuts her trip short. She's in Richmond, Virginia. She drives straight back to Baltimore. She calls everyone that she can think of on the way. Friends, family, coworkers, nobody's seen Ray. At home, she finds Ray's toothbrush, his nightly retainer, everything that would say that he did not plan to be gone overnight. By May 17th, that evening, she is filing a missing person report with Baltimore Police Department. So this is going to move into the search for Rey begins. Big outpouring, friends, family, and police all comb the city. They're looking for his Mitsubishi. Allison's printing missing posters with his picture and all his details. They're blanketing various neighborhoods, asking anybody that knows anything or believes they know anything for leads. Baltimore police, they logged the case, but really they don't have much to go on. In law enforcement's eyes, this is a grown man. No obvious conflicts, no known enemies, no previous mental health issues, no note, no nothing like that. So it's not illegal to disappear as a grown adult. So Baltimore police not taking this one super seriously. Baltimore itself, definitely not a stranger to crime, but Rey's case is particularly perplexing. He's a former high school athlete, 6'5", athletic, not someone who you'd think would vanish kind of easily. He might stick out in a crowd because he's so tall. He also probably would be able to defend himself in some sort of attack. So they check the house. No signs of foul play. Nothing's missing. Nothing, no struggles, nothing. It, just like Claudia had said, he just walked out into the night. No immediate evidence of a crime. The case is treated as a missing adult, albeit under kind of weird circumstances. So a couple days go by. Nobody's heard or seen Rey. On May 22nd, Rey's SUV is found. It's parked in a public lot in Baltimore's Mount Vernon neighborhood, not far from Stansberry and Associates, which is his workplace, Porch Stansberry. Allison's parents are the ones that actually find the vehicle, not the police. They find a parking ticket on the windshield, timestamp May 17th. This is going to suggest the car was there early in the morning after he disappeared. But Rey, still not found. But this kind of gives us a Baltimore PD a area of concentration to focus their search efforts. So they're going to now start focusing downtown. So Mount Vernon, a little background, is a historic district of Baltimore. Right next to the parking lot where Rey's car turned up is the Belvedere Hotel. It's about a century old. It's once was a really, really grand hotel. Now it's housing condominiums. The 13th floor has a bar and some offices. On May 24th, 2006, this is going to be 8 days after Rey went missing. Some of his co-workers decide to search around the Belvedere's adjacent parking structure. So they know Rey's car was here. They kind of have a hunch, maybe that kind of nagging feeling like they might be able to find something. So they go to the top level of the parking garage. And one of the friends looks out towards the Belvedere's rear annex. And not really sure what he sees at first, but on the rooftop, he sees something. So he looks a little closer, and on the top of the Belvedere's conference rooms are some personal items. A pair of flip-flop sandals, a broken cell phone, a pair of eyeglasses, and ultimately what would be identified as Rey's wallet and keys. Perhaps the most jarring discovery is there is a gaping hole in the lower roof, as if something or someone punched clean through from above. The friend immediately calls police. Something terrible's happened here. Baltimore police and fire arrive. They go onto the second floor beneath the hole. And lo and behold, they find an absolute grim discovery. It's an abandoned meeting room. And the body of Rey Rivera is there on the floor, surrounded with debris. It's very clear he's been dead for a couple of days. The room itself was once a racquetball court and then a pool area. And now it's dusty and undisturbed, completely unused. Kind of an eerie scene. Not really something that I would assume that even Baltimore PD or Baltimore ME's or coroner's office would be familiar with. The ceiling opening is jagged. It roughly aligns with the position of Ray's body, and it is in what's described as a state of advanced decomposition after 8 days. It's once they open the door, they get the odor of death, and this is kind of what led the searchers to notice the area in the first place. Initial observations suggest Ray fell from a considerable height, crashing through the conference room. The Belvedere's main floor is 14 floors up, about 177 feet. Directly above the hole, it's not open air. So you're not going to be able to jump from the 14th floor or from the roof and have a clean path all the way down. The Belvedere's ornate mansard rooftop juts out about 40 to 45 feet. The horizontal gap, like I said, roughly 40 to 45 feet. So the question becomes, could Ray have run and jumped out far enough to smash through that roof? And at first glance, it seems pretty much impossible. Yet, here he is. Ray's corpse has this catastrophic trauma. The medical examiner would later catalog a long list of injuries, multiple skull fractures from the base of the spine to the eye sockets to brain hemorrhage, fractured cheekbones, broken nose and jaw, 2 deep cuts on the forehead, torn neck muscles with hemorrhaging, 24 broken ribs, puncturing, which punctured the lungs and his heart. His liver is lacerated, both collarbones and his pelvis are broken. And then he also notes devastating lacerations and internal injuries, notably head to toe. I'm sorry, virtually head to toe. Notably, on his right leg, it's shattered in 2 places with a compound fracture, the bone sticking out through the skin, while his left leg has significantly less damage. The injuries are initially considered consistent with a fall from a great height and a high velocity impact. In his pockets, the investigators find Ray's credit cards and ID. But one of the things that they don't find, which is kind of troubling, is a money clip. Allison, his wife, had a custom-made money clip engraved with his initials. She said that he did not leave the house without it. It was always on him. It's not found. To this day, the money clip is unaccounted for. Maybe lost in the fall, maybe taken beforehand, we're not sure. So crime scene techs, they survey the rooftop in the conference room. They recover his cell phone and glasses, and they are both remarkably intact. Neither the glasses nor the phone are cracked. 14-story plunge would typically shatter fragile items like that. A former Baltimore police commander, Mel Blizzard, who was also an expert on behavioral analysis, commented that while it's possible for a phone to survive such a fall, his quote was, "I just find it to be highly unlikely with that type of kinetic energy hitting that rooftop." And then he added, there were a, quote, lot of unanswered questions, a lot of loops that need to be closed. So interesting quote there. Ray's flip-flops are also recovered from the roof. One has what are described as drag marks and a broken strap, as if it was scraped along a surface, i.e. he was dragged with it on his foot. The evidence on the roof and in the room overall kind of sketches out a baffling scenario. It appears somehow Ray fell from the upper part of the hotel, hit the lower part with tremendous force, and went right through. But the problem that they're having is, how did he get to that point? Baltimore police have no eyewitnesses who saw him anywhere near the top or on top of the Belvedere Hotel. The hotel staff is interviewed. They don't recall anyone by his description that day. And the security cameras that may have captured entry or fall yielded nothing. They're writing it off, saying it's a technical problem that prevented any footage recovery from the around May 16th to the 17th. So basically, one of the only mechanisms that could show how and when Rey entered the building completely failed. So by the time Rey's body's found, it's pretty decomposed. 8 days, not a ton of time, but there's a lot of different factors involved in the rates of decomposition, including things like injuries, if he does have like the open fractures and the cuts. Insect activity could start from the inside out, things like that. So also don't know the temperature of that room, the humidity of the room. So 8 days, it could be very decomposed or it could be pretty preserved. So, but they're saying badly decomposed. Upon discovery, paramedics and police, they note right away that these injuries are not compatible with life. There's no life-saving efforts. And now the Maryland Office of the Chief Medical Examiner gets involved. According to Maryland law, any death that occurs by violence, accident, suicide, or, quote, in any suspicious or unusual manner, quote, must be investigated by the medical examiner. So the police notify the medical examiner's office immediately as required. Under 5-308 of Maryland's Health General Statutes, a medical examiner or medical examiner's investigator is to come to the scene, take charge of the body, and, quote, investigate fully the essential facts surrounding the death. So, like I said in the last one about Georgia law, that's a pretty common theme across the country, that any suspicious or unusual manner, violence, accident, suicide, it's pretty standard wording. And then same with taking charge of the body, taking custody of the body, whatever. It's all going to kind of be worded the same to mean that this is the coroner or the medical examiner's jurisdiction. So this one does have a little bit of extra wording that I personally appreciate, which is going to be that they are charged with investigating fully the essential facts. So this is going to task the Maryland ME's office with not just an autopsy, but also examining the totality of the death alongside law enforcement. But the reason we're here from the start, there are signs that this investigation might not be unfolding by the book. Some witnesses at the Belvedere, they report that they never saw the police bag any evidence, dust for fingerprints, or even take any photographs on the roof where Rey's belongings were found. That's a huge problem. There are a lot of different ways to skin a cat when it comes to photographing and collecting evidence. Basic photography, in this case, in most death investigation, is going to be to, I'll just use an interior because exterior can get a little tricky, but in the interior of a home or a building, you want to take a photo from all four corners of the room. So we want like a 360 view of the room. And then anything that you consider evidence or you're considering a piece of interest in the case, not even maybe something that you are going to collect, you're going to want to take a wide shot that includes that piece of evidence or that important thing. And then you're going to want to take a close shot. So you want the overall where it's located in the room. And then you want to take a close shot of how it's located, the close-up detail of it. And then obviously if you're getting into more forensic or evidence collection, you might photograph with like an ABFO scale, different light sources, something like that. So, but the basic is we want all four corners of the scene, a 360 view. We want a wide shot of the evidence, then we want a close shot of the evidence. And ideally, you want a photo as that evidence is being collected, and then the photo of whatever medium that evidence is going into. So flip-flops, in this case, would more than likely be going into like a brown paper bag or even a box. You're going to want to photograph the process of you putting into that box, and then you're going to want to photograph some sort of seal with your initials, date, time, something like that. And then same for the cell phone. Depends what their protocols are. This is 2006, so not saying that they didn't know what cell phones were, but they were still a sort of a newer technology at the time. Relative term, newer technology. Now we attempt to put every cell phone on airplane mode. If that doesn't work or you're unable to, then we will try to place them in a Faraday bag, something that's going to block all signals. I don't believe they would have done this back then. It probably would have gone into just a plastic evidence bag if it didn't have any bodily fluids on it. Which, quick side note, if something has bodily fluids or is wet or has the potential to have like sweat or blood or something on it, it goes into like a brown paper bag so it can breathe and dry. Plastic will immediately start cultivating mold, and you don't want any of that. So the phone, if it's not covered in blood, should go in a plastic bag. There should be date and time of collection, who collected it, the victim or the suspect's name, the case number, the agency, and then it should have a brief description of what's in the bag. And then typically evidence bags have a chain of custody table or chart right on them. You're going to put where you brought it from. In this case, it would be either the scene or maybe the address. And then you're going to put where you transported it to, whatever numbered evidence locker you brought it to, with dates and times. So we are way off the beaten path on collecting evidence. So the chief medical examiner performs a full autopsy on Rey Rivera. The results are released, and they paint a pretty clear picture of the injuries, but not of the incident. So the cause of death, very obvious, multiple blunt force trauma, consistent with a fall from a significant height. The sheer catalog of injuries, skull, torso, legs, they all align with an impact akin to jumping from a high building. Tox comes back essentially clean. I would call it clean. There's no illicit substances in Ray's system. A small trace of alcohol. They say it's so small it could be a byproduct of decomposition rather than actually consuming alcohol. But either way, at that low amount, not really worried about it altering his mental state. Toxicology can't test for everything. There are broad forensic panels that cover a lot of different types of drugs, but anything new, designer, an inhalant, things like that would need their own separate test. So in the absence of those, we can say, or the medical examiner says, nothing chemically incapacitated him. There's no definitive signs of an assault, like a stab wound or a gunshot, no obvious defensive wounds, but given the extreme trauma and the decomposition, many subtle foul play indicators may have been completely masked. So I will give the medical examiner in this case credit. This is not an easy thing to do. Not that determining a manner should ever be a PR or political or appeasement move, but the ME decides that he does not have enough information to support a specific manner of death. So he does not rule it a suicide, homicide, or accident. Instead, he rules it undetermined. So for those who are not familiar, there is suicide, homicide, accident, natural, and undetermined. Those are your manners of death, not to be confused with cause. So cause, this sounds stupid, is directly what caused the person's death. What natural process or outside force caused that person to expire. So If someone gets shot in the head, it's gunshot wound of the head, and then that's your cause. The manner is how that bullet came to be in that person's head. So if they pulled the trigger, suicide. If somebody else pulled the trigger, homicide. Very rarely would a gunshot to the head be an accident. Maybe if they were like recording themselves cleaning the gun or something and caught it on camera. But so undetermined is a cause and a manner. It's kind of one of those weird ones that can be both. So in this case, cause, pretty simple as far as the ME is concerned. It's blunt force trauma. They do explicitly say in the report notes for this autopsy that while the injuries are consistent with a fall from a tall building, the circumstances remain unclear, with, quote, absolutely no indication of foul play or signs of struggle, quote, but also no evidence of self-harm. So we don't have enough, basically. Undetermined manners and undetermined causes are a bitch. I will tell you this from personal experience. I always tell people, and this is, I'm sure I'll get absolutely vilified for this, but like, nobody wants to know what killed somebody more than I do. Like, families want closure, they want answers, but like, I guarantee you I want to know more than you. So if I have to call a family and tell them undetermined manner or undetermined cause, it like hurts my soul. And then, of course, they jump down your throat about you didn't do your job. There's got to be some other test, blah, blah, blah. And then I don't ever tell them this, but like in the back of my mind, I'm like, I want to know more than you. Like, I want to know more than you could ever imagine. So in Maryland, undetermined, it made up about 20% of their cases in 2006. Which is kind of a reflection of the caution that the ME's office used when the evidence was inconclusive, or it's meant to signal that further investigation is needed. Baltimore police, homicide detectives put this as a pending case, since they don't have a firm manner of death from the ME's office. So 20% seems kind of high. That is the whole state of Maryland, being 2006, 20% of their cases were classified undetermined. That seems awful high for undetermined cases. I probably do 2 a year that are undetermined. And I would say that that's probably the pretty standard across our office. So, I mean, we're probably looking at like 10 to 12 undetermineds a year out of like 2,000, 2,500 cases. So let me do some quick. I'm sure there's people out there that are like, I know that right off the top of my head. So going on the high side for both, we do about 2,000 cases, and 12 of them come back undetermined. That's about 0.6% for our office. So it's quite a bit. 20% obviously is quite a bit higher than that. I would be interested to know what their threshold is for an undetermined case, or what their threshold isn't for an undetermined case. For us, I mean, all avenues have to be exhausted. Like, there has to be no more blood to test, no more urine to test, no more anything. Tissue, histology has had to come back with nothing. We consult specific pathologists, so we have general pathologists that do autopsies. And then we consult like specific cardiac pathologists, neuropathologists. So we would really have to exhaust a case to be undetermined. 20% seems high. So sorry for that tangent. But so Ray's loved ones, super frustrated because the Baltimore police publicly lean into like a close-ended view of this case. In the days after his body was found, there's a lot of press conferences, and the Baltimore police state publicly that Rivera's death was likely a suicide. From their perspective, the simplest explanation was that Rey, for unknown reasons, jumped from the top of the Belvedere to his death. The police commissioner at the time, Fred Bielefeld, noted to reporters that investigators had not been able to uncover any evidence of criminal involvement. And he he said, quote, "There's not been one scintilla of information that would indicate there was anything criminal associated with Mr. Rivera's death," end quote. Triple word score for scintilla. Bielefeld commented that even though Rey has no history of mental health issues, signs of depression, quote, "the circumstances and the hard evidence that we have really point to this being a suicide," end quote. So this pronouncement came even as questions lingered about Rey. And could he have physically made that jump? Baltimore police essentially have prematurely ruled the case probable suicide in the public eye. And everyone knows once you turn public opinion, it's almost impossible to get it back. The ME's office refuses to commit to that conclusion. So, just to make a comment about Fred, Commissioner Fred here, his statement, "the circumstances and the hard evidence that we have really point to this being a suicide." So, I think mostly what he's commenting on as far as hard evidence is lack of hard evidence. So, from his point of view, he's not saying we have hard evidence that this is a suicide. Hard evidence of a suicide would be we have a handwritten note verified by some sort of handwriting expert to be in Rey's handwriting, stating this is his intention. We have some lesser known or some lesser, like maybe more overlooked. I promised myself I wouldn't say as much. I'm working on it. Some lesser known kind of things that we would look at from an investigative standpoint would be search history. A lot of times people will research the cause or the mechanism by which they are going to commit suicide. So you'll get people that Google carbon monoxide poisoning in a car, in a garage, and then they'll Google circumstances surrounding them, especially someone like Rey who had a wife and wanted to start a family and all that. You'll get people that Googles things like, does life insurance pay out suicide? So those would be things that I would consider hard evidence. The hardest evidence would be the video footage, but in lieu of that, I would like to see something that constitutes hard evidence. In this case, I think Commissioner Fred kind of jumped the gun and spoke out of turn by saying that there's hard evidence. I think what he's more speaking to is their lack of evidence. And so what he's saying is we don't have any evidence that this isn't a suicide. So the natural fallback is going to be it is a suicide. So just a little side tangent as far as suicide notes, or more appropriately, they should be referred to as handwritten notes, because you can't make the assumption that they're a suicide note. The statistics on this are wildly varied. So anywhere from, I've heard 3 to 42% of people leave a note. I've heard 25 to 30%. I will tell you from my personal experience, it is between like 3 and 7% of people leave a suicide note or a handwritten note at the scene of their death. And that's typically what I see in trainings and conferences and stuff too. It's a relatively low number of people that leave a suicide note. It's actually more suspicious to me if someone does leave a suicide note at this point, because it's really a minority thing to do. Minority being obviously less people leave them than don't. I'm sorry, less people, yes, than do rather. Um, so sorry, a lot of side tangents there. So Ray's family vehemently rejected the suicide theory from the start. Allison and Ray's siblings get together and they publicly say that he has no history of suicidal intent, no history of suicidal ideations, anything. He had recently celebrated a 6-month wedding anniversary. He was talking about future plans. He was actively working on new projects. By all accounts, he was optimistic and looking forward to the next chapter of life. So, let me finish this in a little section of notes, and then I'll go into another tangent. So, Baltimore police themselves, they don't find any evidence of despair, no diary entries, no emails, no sudden change in behavior, some recent stressors, but nothing overly compounding. Commander Billafield acknowledged they found, quote, no indication that Rivera had been depressed or distraught, quote, before he vanished. Ray had even been searching Freemasonry in the days prior, kind of a weird hobby, but one he had approached with curiosity and not fear. So backing up a little bit, this is another kind of like catch-22 gotcha. So he celebrated his 6-month wedding anniversary. I don't know what their marriage was like. She says that it was great. Family says it was great. What happens behind closed doors is just that. What happens behind closed doors. So 6-month wedding anniversary absolutely could be a stressor. There are some basic questions that always need to be asked if suicide is thought to be a manner or even might be considered as a manner of death. And I'll let you in on these little secrets. So, big ones. Any financial issues? It's one of the first questions that I ask people on the scene of a suspected suicide. Financial issues run rampant. They control someone's entire life. And that feeling of being buried in debt, behind the 8 ball, not being able to make ends meet, it's powerful. Like people always say, it's like the oldest motives for murder are love and money. And it's no different for suicide. Which brings me to my next point. Relationship issues are the next questions. And that's something I ask for every suicide. Has this person recently had any relationship issues with anybody? Family, friends, girlfriend, boyfriend, anything. Murder and suicide, very similar. So we're looking for the oldest reasons in the book, love and money. Next thing we ask, which some people might not take into account, and I've actually had people comment on scenes like, oh, I didn't think of that, is does this time of year hold any significance to this person? So this can mean a lot of things. This can mean they had a family member or a friend that died around this time of year. Some people get real low in the wintertime. Some people get low around the holidays. Some people don't like their birthdays. So, and same thing with weddings. Some people, it could be an absolute nightmare to celebrate a wedding anniversary or go through some sort of turmoil with their significant other, especially on a wedding anniversary. So, using that as an example as to why he wouldn't have done it, I see it as a potential stressor. Like I said, I don't know the ins and outs of their marriage, so if they're saying it's not a stressor, then you pretty much have to take their word for it and just note it and move on. But I will say, excited about future plans, working on new projects, none of that matters. I know it sounds harsh, but I have had people that were focused on future plans, talking about future plans, making lunch plans for the following day, making plans to meet with friends or family, and they didn't show up because they committed suicide. It's happened before, we planned lunch with the family. He was supposed to be here at noon. Didn't show up, wasn't answering his phone, went to his house, found him hanging in the garage. So making plans and stuff is not an automatic rule out of suicide, but it's definitely something that needs to be noted in the scope of the entire investigation. So that's my little side tangent. Relationship issues, money issues, this time of year hold any significance, and then obviously prior ideations or attempts are the big questions in investigating a suicide. So the family still has no clear alternate explanation from the authorities. BPD pretty content to assume Ray committed suicide. And there's this one really weird piece of evidence that manifests. So Allison is cleaning Ray's office in the period between when he went missing and when his body was found. And she's finds this note, and it's folded, taped behind his computer monitor in this like plastic sleeve. And it's this weird rambling collage of thoughts. So it opens with an expression associated frequently with the Freemasons, which is whom virtue unites, death will not separate. And then it's got a list of famous people who had died, a list of people Ray knew personally, some movie references, and then some phrases that kind of sounded like a secret message without knowing the full context. And then there's also a blank check wedged inside with it. So Allison, obviously distraught, baffled, and the note kind of reads like a coded stream of consciousness. Baltimore police think it's suspicious. They send it to the FBI's behavioral analysis unit for deciphering. FBI's conclusion was surprising to Baltimore, not to the family. Despite its kind of weird content, the behavioral analysis unit for the FBI says this is not a suicide note. It appeared to be, as one reviewer put it, a weird stream of conscious writing, possibly even written in some kind of code or intended as a fictional outline. In other words, it didn't say goodbye, cruel world, or reveal any intent to die. It just kind of adds more mystery. And this is one of those things. Suicide notes are typically pretty straightforward. Very rarely are they written in some sort of weird code. I have never come across one that is like this, like they describe. They typically outline what the person's about to do. There's some sort of apology, sometimes, most of the time. And sometimes there's multiple notes to multiple people. More often than not, if they leave a single note or they take the time to write a note, they take the time to write multiple notes for multiple family members or friends or whatever. But typically they read something like, can't do this anymore. I've tried to be really strong. Don't mourn me. I'm tired. Some that really allude to death. Now, I've had suicide notes that lie. I've had people that are in criminal trouble, and they say in the suicide note, I'm innocent. I was set to be arrested today, or I was set to start my jail sentence today. I didn't do it. The charges are false, yada, yada, yada. And then the investigation results are released to the public, and it's like, yeah, they definitely did it. Like, they got a video of them doing it, holding their driver's license up to the camera. Something, it's just like so obvious that the person did it. And then their suicide note's like, I never did it. So that's pretty common. But typically an apology, typically something along the lines of being in pain, no longer wanting to be in pain, things like that. That's a pretty common through line in all the suicide notes or handwritten notes that I've ever read. So this is kind of a cryptic message to someone about something, but for what and for whom still remains unknown. So the note's existence, unfortunately, fuels speculation that Ray had a mental break or some kind of delusional thought that influenced his decision. The FBI theorizes that he could have been suffering from a psychotic disorder that led to suicide. And the FBI even recommends re-interviewing the family for any kind of like real subtle behavioral health signs. So the theory now is essentially that Ray experienced an acute mental health crisis. It never really became the official narrative, but it kind of influenced the private stance of law enforcement at the time. So it doesn't come out as the official narrative, but it kind of seeps into the investigators and higher ups' minds, and they run with it. So the FBI deems the note non-suicidal. Experts say there's no direct evidence of foul play. The case kind of teeters of uncertainty. Maryland ME's office saying it's undetermined means the case stays open. Ray's death is technically an open pending investigation with Baltimore homicide, but families know, you and I know, open on paper doesn't mean actively pursued. And behind the scenes, the investigation stalls out. So, a couple of, I'm just going to go over the missteps and the missed steps and the missteps. So, to a true crime audience and many seasoned investigator, the story so far raises a ton of red flags. Not necessarily red flags of conspiracy as far as I'm concerned, but red flags of procedural missteps. So I'm kind of going to go through how the investigation was handled and what should have happened if they followed not just general good practice, but protocols that are pretty standard across the industry. So, So, treating death as a homicide or not. In death investigation and law enforcement in general, there's a golden rule. And that rule is any death is a homicide until you prove otherwise. So the thought is that this is going to protect the integrity of the investigation. So the highest level of evidence preservation in a case is a homicide. In Ray's case, the moment his body was found in a weird location with no witnesses, the death is inherently suspicious. Best practice and proper procedure would dictate you secure the scene as a crime scene and you investigate with an open mind to all possibilities. Maryland's standards kind of echo this by saying that any violent or unusual death is a medical examiner's case and generally also a police matter of concern. Keeping in mind, and I will reiterate this, every death is a homicide until you find evidence otherwise. So when you walk into a scene, when I walk into a scene, I don't care if it is a 2-year-old. I don't care if it is a 92-year-old that has every form of cancer under the sun and was going on hospice tomorrow. It is a homicide until I find evidence that it's not a homicide. And what this is going to do, this is going to keep me and my focus on the highest level of investigation, the highest level of evidence preservation, the highest level of documentation, and that's where it should be. Now, most of them turn out to be natural or some other manner of death that's not homicide. But on the weird ones that do turn out to be a different manner or indeed a homicide, there's no going up. So you can't walk in and say, oh, this is natural. Grandma kicked the bucket and start touching stuff without gloves. And, maybe you move the body before you snap a photo. And then all of a sudden you like roll grandma over and she's got a knife in her back. And you're like, oh, fuck. You can't go back. You can't go back and not touch stuff without gloves. You can't go back and reposition her and take a photograph and say, well, I think this is where she was before I rolled her over. So start at the top, glove it up, lots of documentation, lots of photographs. Don't move anything. If you do, document. And then when you find out that Granny did in fact die a peaceful natural death at home surrounded by her family, then you can say in your head, it's no longer homicide. So BPD, they quickly fixate on suicide. And this early conclusion kind of shapes their approach going forward. And this is kind of a common thing that happens. If an investigator convinces themselves that they're dealing with a suicide or is convinced they're dealing with a suicide, they're not going to take the same steps that they would if it was a homicide. So, like I said, less evidence collection, fewer interviews. We're not looking for a perpetrator, and that bias is a costly assumption, like I said. And then the next thing, evidence preservation. So we talked about it earlier. Witnesses observe a lack of thorough evidence collection on the roof where Rey is presumed to have impacted. At a minimum, technicians should have photographed the positions of Rey's glasses, flip-flops, and any debris from the broken roof. These items should have been bagged and evidence bagged, documented for any damage. So the flip-flop should have been documented for damage to the strap and the pristine condition of the phone. Fingerprints and DNA swabs should have been taken from the phone and the glasses. It's just what should have happened in this case. And if these steps aren't done or weren't done, the opportunity to find some other person's involvement are gone. So if we don't preserve these correctly, let's say we toss them all in a bag together, we touch them without a gloved hand, whatever it may be, and down the road we decide that we want to do some of those tests, good luck getting that admitted in court. Good luck going and sitting in front of a jury or a defense attorney and saying, yeah, we threw all his shit in a bag, and then I left it in the back of my car and went to McDonald's, and then I stopped by to let my dog out, and then I went to the police department and I threw it in a locker. I don't remember which one, maybe the bottom of my locker. And then you do some testing and then you find out, oh, this guy's fingerprints are all over it and he's the murderer. They're going to throw that evidence right out of court. So, like they always say, what you know and what you can prove are two different things. So, start at the highest level of evidence preservation. There's a guest at the Belvedere who reports that the police on the scene initially seemed surprisingly casual. Nobody was combing the area. Nobody was calling for a lockdown of the scene or the hotel. And this perception might not capture everything that was done. Don't get me wrong. There could have been things happening behind the scenes that the public wasn't aware of. But there are a couple things we know don't exist. So a lack of a detailed crime scene log or photographs in the case file. So those are going to confirm through FOIA requests that the documentation is lacking. An experienced homicide detective who reviewed the file noted there was no diagram of the scene. In his experience, that was something that was always done in a death investigation to map the body's position and evidence layout. The absence of a diagram and comprehensive photos is a serious procedural lapse. Without them, years later, cold case detectives or independent experts will not be able to reconstruct what happened. So, diagrams or drawings are not always required for protocol across agencies. There are some agencies in my jurisdiction that require a diagram of a death scene. There are some that don't. I will be honest, I do not draw a diagram of every death scene. In this case, I would have. I would have taken measurements of the room, sketched it out, measurements off of the walls where he was, and sketched it out. You can go on Amazon and look up crime scene drawing template. It's a beautiful piece of technology. It's like a template that you used to have in school to draw certain shapes, except for it's for grown-ups. And it's got bodies and furniture and guns and knives. It's very cool, but definitely something that's useful. A crime scene log is an instantaneous must. You have to know who's coming in and out of that crime scene. We do these automatically for anything that's not like a glaringly natural death as far as PD goes. We don't personally keep crime scene logs at the office I work at, but the various jurisdictions, agencies in my jurisdiction rather, they do keep crime scene logs for everything that's pretty much not a natural death. We document it differently. We have a report that we write. So we detail who came in and out of our scene and when, times, dates, everything. But a lot of police agencies, they have a specific log that they fill out. So no log, no diagram, lack of photographs. These are all pretty much going to lead to a case that's going to go nowhere. So surveillance and witness follow-up. Security camera footage never recovered due to a technical problem. There are lots of questions raised. Technology is what technology is. And a lot of times the technical problem with technology is what I like to call a user interface error, which means that the person who's using it fucks it up. So, or the camera's not working, maybe. Was the guy who has only ever had to recover video one other time and got called in on his day off? Did he screw up the video collection and delete something he shouldn't have? Maybe. But investigators, they probably should have dug a little bit more into the technical problem. They probably should have ruled out any sort of tampering. And then they probably should have branched out to street cameras, nearby businesses. In 2006, Baltimore's going to have way fewer CCTV cameras than today, but they should have done a canvas. These are done now, especially nowadays with Ring doorbell cameras and all the Nest cameras and all that. You can't go anywhere without being recorded. So canvassing, still a very important part of the job, should have been happening in 2006. So, in the case file, it is noted that the police, they briefly pursue a lead with a camera on an adjacent parking garage. The detective's notes indicate they contacted the garage's owners to obtain the footage, and then nothing. There's no other follow-up. So there's a lot of reasons. By the time they asked, the recordings could have been written over. Some right over after a week. Some right over after 30 days, 24 hours. It just really depends. But there should have been some sort of follow-up. If you write that you followed up and attempted to get this footage, one, if the guy said I don't have any, or it's a fake camera, or it already rewrote, or already deleted it, that needs to be noted. And two, if the guy says no, pretty sure you have grounds for a warrant. I'm not an expert, but probably should have pursued that a little bit more. Another problem with this case is the critical hours, the 24 hours after he was reported missing or after he went missing, and then the days that followed. This was treated as like a non-criminal missing person case. By the time they realized how bad it was, video evidence was gone. So, had this been treated with more urgency, there's a chance they could have found the car sooner. They could have recovered some footage. Time is your enemy. in these kinds of investigations. The more time passes, the more changes to the body, the harder it is to tell the cause of death, the harder it is to collect witness statements, the harder it is to collect video footage. In this case, no eyewitnesses were ever identified. But the question is, did police interview everyone at the Baltimore thoroughly? The Belvedere. So the building is going to have residents, a bar, staff, maintenance workers, and you would expect dozens, if not hundreds, of interviews to see if anybody saw or heard anything. A loud crash, a person on the upper floor, and there's little public record that an extensive canvass happened. The overall impression is that the suicide theory took hold, the urgency of gathering evidence waned, and they did not do interviews. I heard this in a training one time, and I have seen it on multiple other true crime shows, forensic files. I have discussed it with law enforcement and other death investigators. If you are not listening for a sound, let's use the example of a gunshot. If you're at home during the day, during the night, whatever, and your doors are closed, your windows are closed, or they're open, you've got the TV on, you've got a fan on, you've got your air conditioner or heater on, the dryer, washer's running, you're listening to something on your phone, whatever it is, and you hear or think you hear a gunshot, what was the first thing we all do? We're like, man, was that a gunshot? Nah. And then you move on. But you still retain that memory of like, oh, I was watching this, or I was doing this at the time. If you're not listening for that, I mean, obviously, if you go around and you're like, hey, did you hear anybody or anything that sounded a 6'5", mid-30s male crashing through the roof of the conference center? Obviously, people are going to say no. But if you say, like, hey, did you hear any weird noises, any strange noises? Did you hear any noises you don't normally hear? And someone might have said, like, yeah, on the morning of the 17th, like, heard this crazy loud thud. Wrote it off as maybe a car accident on street level, and I moved on with my day. Something to establish a timeline. Not doing the interviews is absolutely insane. If I was ME's investigator or the coroner's investigator, I would have done it myself. So this kind of brings into the overall investigative thoroughness. The official case file is accessed by a journalist or a group of journalists years later, and it shows that the detectives essentially stopped investigating after a couple of weeks. Progress reports in the file abruptly end in June of 2006. Homicide detectives' notes simply trail off, and as one reporter described, quote, it's like you're reading a book and suddenly it stops as if the story just ended. Leads that should have been followed up on weren't. Ray's finances, nobody pulled his bank or credit card records to see any transactions around the time. If they did, it's not noted in the file. They did not do a forensic analysis of Ray's computer activity. Allison noted the computer was on, showing a web page about the times of sunset for Baltimore on May 16th. So this is going to suggest that Ray had specifically looked up when sunset would occurred. A weird detail. Maybe he wanted to go view it from a rooftop. But aside from that, no forensic computer analysis. Every piece of digital evidence that could have provided insight basically either was ignored or wasn't collected. And then we come to perhaps the most important piece that was overlooked, and this is going to be the call that Claudia, the house guest, said that Ray got. Investigators trace it, kinda. It was routed through a switchboard of Agora, which is the parent company of Ray's workplace, Stansberry and Associates. So essentially, it came from his work offices. Who placed it? Agora's management says They can't identify an internal extension or a caller. Stansberry, who's Ray's friend and boss, and his employees clam up. Agora's lawyer instructs employees not to speak to the police about Ray's case. It's extraordinarily frustrating. It's not illegal. They do have a right to remain silent unless subpoenaed. But I will tell you that is incredibly suspicious behavior. So, law enforcement could have pushed harder. They could have tried to essentially corner an employee of Agora or Stansberry and Associates outside of work and push them a little harder, maybe outside of a group setting. But they did not issue subpoenas or warrants for any sort of leads in the company. And then any sort of deeper probe into Ray's work or controversy at work just kind of completely stalls because Agora's lawyers have said don't talk to the police. I would see this as a critical investigative failure. So I think that based on the fact that the call originated from inside the business, I think that you have Claudia's eyewitness account of a phone call happened at this time. The police confirmed through phone records, yes, she is correct. A phone call took place at this time. This phone call appears to have set off a chain of events that led to this person dying. The phone call originated from his place of business. 100% they should have followed up with every single person that worked there. And it does not matter if their corporate lawyers instructed employees not to speak to police. You, as an individual, have a right to speak to the police or tell them, see my attorney. So these people should have been run down. You're probably going to find a weak link somewhere in the company, and someone's going to say something. At the minimum, I believe that some sort of IT support person should have been subpoenaed to testify that there's no way to track the internal extension. This one is a really hot button, like hotly debated. I'm sure people are going to get like super upset with me and be like, that's not procedural. How do I describe this? There's following procedure to maintain the integrity of the investigation, such as documenting evidence correctly. And then there's not following the letter or following the letter of the procedure, but maybe not the spirit. So these people should have been questioned. Anybody who worked for Agora or Stansberry and Associates should have been questioned. I'm not going to go any farther into that. It just should have happened. As a note, I will say, reiterate, it is not illegal to not talk to the police. You do have a right to remain silent. It is your constitutional right. It's been your constitutional right in this country for a long time. Like, not just Miranda warnings, but like, you can plead the Fifth Amendment. You don't have to self-incriminate. There's a lot of things you don't have to do. But officially, there's nothing wrong with it. But from an investigative standpoint, weird. If you don't have anything to hide, and I know people always say, like, police are not your friends, they're trying to get you to confess. It's true to a point, but also, like, just common sense. If you have a person that died, and they work for this company. And one person made one phone call to this guy, and the entire company's legal team says nobody can talk to the police about it. It's weird. It's definitely strikes as suspicious. Now, officially, legally, constitutionally, is it suspicious? No, it's your right. You don't have to talk to the police. You can remain silent. From an investigative standpoint, it's fucking weird and suspicious as hell. That's my 2 cents. So, moving on to forensic analysis and consultation. In super complex death scenes, it's not uncommon for investigators to bring in specialists. So, I would say ME, coroner's office, deputy coroners, whatever you want to call them, are pretty much generalists. So, we have to have a good general knowledge of engineering, excuse me, trajectory, medical, firearms, explosives, car accidents. We kind of have to have a general knowledge of all those things to make the initial determination of this is a strange death. We need to bring it back for further studies as far as an autopsy, or we need to look into this more and bring in a specialist. So, forensic engineers, trajectory analysts should have been brought in to conduct reenactments. In this case, an engineering study was eventually done, which was not commissioned by any law enforcement. It was likely commissioned by authors and reporters. And this concluded that Rey's trajectory, to match where he landed, he had to have sprinted and jumped from the roof at about 11 miles an hour, which is not an unheard of speed for an athletic person in a short run. The physics do suggest he was not pushed from a standstill, which would have meant he was closer to the building, but he did leap with force. So, if police had any doubts about the jump, you would expect them to replicate the scenario. Could someone get a running start on that roof in flip-flops, get up to 11 miles per hour, have a good launch and take off? Where was the takeoff point? Maybe a lower ledge or a lower rooftop instead of the top roof. Another theory that was kind of floated later was that Rey went off a ledge partway up the building, or even off the parking garage itself, but the evidence doesn't clearly support those theories. So, in 2006, we have no evidence that investigators did any sort of simulation analysis or rigorous trajectory recreation. They took the scene at face value, which is a big no-no. When months and years later, when outside experts looked at the case, they noted oddities, the pattern of Rey's injuries. One forensic investigator observed the injuries were more severe on one side of Rey's body than the other, so the right side compared to his left. That person commented if they fell straight down through the roof, you might expect some symmetric injuries or certain telltale marks on the hands, as if someone's bracing for impact. The unilateral damage reminded her more of cases where people were struck by vehicles. One side gets crushed, the other is relatively spared. And then this leads to speculation that maybe Rey was hit by something like a car on the parking garage roof, propelled through the air. That theory is highly debated, but it does kind of underscore an alternative explanation that existed and why further examination was warranted. But as far as we know, the police did not consult any sort of accident reconstructionist or consider this any other possibilities at the time. And their mind was pretty much made up that Rey jumped. End of the story. So, another consequence of probable suicide was communication, or just a complete lack thereof, with Rey's actual family. So, Allison and the Rivera family have often stated that they felt kept in the dark. And I'll get through this and then I'll go off on one of my tangents. The case remains technically open, which is why the police could decline certain public records requests, but the family got a real little bit of information. At one point, Allison hires her own private investigator out of desperation. Proper protocol would involve keeping next of kin apprised, especially since foul play wasn't formally ruled out. If authorities internally closed the book, they may have not been as proactive in sharing updates, and this kind of erodes trust. And it was really only after the case got national attention in 2020 Unsolved Mysteries episodes that the Baltimore police even released the case files. And then that release was indirectly. It was to Netflix, who then shared it with reporters. So I will play devil's advocate for this one. Keeping next of kin notified. From a law enforcement perspective, as far as the police are concerned, I get keeping them in the dark. If you do have a piece of information that maybe only someone involved who would know, maybe only somebody who murdered him, pushed him, hit him with a car, you don't want to make that public knowledge while it's still a pending investigation, obviously. From the coroner's office side, it's a little different. We typically make our reports public as soon as the case is closed and the final cause and manner are determined. In this case, the manner was undetermined. Still would call for the case being closed because we know what killed him, just not why. But I will say that even in my work, when I interview people, I will often, until the case is closed, from both a police perspective and the coroner's office perspective, I will often omit certain details or circumstances because I want to know what they know. So this is pretty obvious, common sense stuff. If I go onto a scene and a person is shot in the right side of their head, and the person who quote unquote discovered the body or called for the check for welfare, whatever it was, says, I never went in the room. I never saw anything. I just saw his legs, or he didn't answer the door, so I called you guys. Whatever the case may be. I'm not going to tell that person where the entrance wound is. I want to see if they know, because then we have a problem. So if you tell me I never saw the body, and then you say something like, oh, there's so much blood coming out of the right side of his head. It sounds stupid, but it happens. People will literally say two things like that in the same paragraph. Hell, they'll say it in the same sentence. Like, I never saw the body. Like, there was too much blood coming. And it's like, whoa, like, if you never saw the body, how the hell did you know blood was coming out of his mouth? Like, it's crazy. So, I get keeping the family in the dark to a certain point. That's my side note for that one. When you lay all this out, you kind of get a full picture of an investigation that fell short of best practices. And there's a lot of unanswered questions as to why. A lot of it is attributed to early bias. Some limited resources, but Baltimore police would have had a pretty significant budget. And then other pressures. There's only a finite number of detectives. Baltimore's a busy place. There's crimes to be solved. Not every crime can get the full attention of all the detectives all the time. I get it. The problem is, in the world of criminal investigations, unanswered questions are just as dangerous as bad answers because they breed speculation, distrust, and they let the truth slip away. It's been almost 19 years since Rey Rivera died. Officially, the case is open but cold, categorized as an undetermined death in the files of Baltimore police homicide. Unofficially, it's a wound that's never closed for the family. And I will tell you, from someone who investigates death and provides some form of closure to families, that is probably what hurts the most. There's a good chance that we will never know the exact chain of events that led to Rey going through the roof or being in that conference room. But what we do know is how crucial the proper procedure is in these kinds of cases, and how the lack of it can alter the course of justice. So just imagine if things had been handled differently. I know this is all speculative, but if police had treated Rey's death from the start as a homicide, securing every piece of evidence, maybe they would have uncovered something that pointed away from suicide, or they may have found something that confirmed their suicide with more certainty. Treating it as a homicide doesn't mean it is one. It just means that nothing gets overlooked. So had they done so, maybe there'd be far less nagging doubts today. Key surveillance footage might have been saved or accessed in time. A witness who didn't come forward because they were thinking it's just a suicide may have reported seeing Rey, maybe with somebody or alone. And if foul play was involved, early aggressive investigation is the only chance to catch it. It's more than hunches and luck. If evidence had been preserved and documented fully, future investigators, whether within BPD or independent analysis, could have re-examined the case with fresh eyes, because physical evidence doesn't lie. Ever. But only if it's available. So high-resolution photos of the roof may reveal a bloodstain, a footprint, a more precise resting place of an item, allowing for a more complete trajectory analysis. Missing evidence and an unmeasured scene means we rely on recollections and guesses, which is like relying on rainbows and unicorn farts. In Rey's case, there's no scene diagram. If the fall scenario were ever challenged in court, that absence would be a defense attorney's dream. Adhering to evidence protocols is not bureaucratic. It's what builds a reliable narrative of events. Forensic analysis should have been more exhaustive, and then some of this mystery might have been dispelled. So if the ME had consulted an orthopedic specialist about the leg injuries, or a physicist about the fall dynamics, which may have happened informally, but there's no formal documentation of a cross-specialty consultation in any record. The ME did what they were mandated to do, so I can't fault them for that. They examined the body, they determined the cause of death, trauma, in the manner undetermined, but undetermined should really spark a joint effort with police to determine it. Maryland's Postmortem Examiners Commission guidelines call for investigating fully the essential facts of deaths like this and delivering any useful evidence to the state's attorney. It kind of makes you wonder if the ME's investigator and police had ever reconstructed Rey's path on site together, which there's no record of them doing. Adherence to protocols may have prompted something like a staged reenactment. Maybe having an officer harnessed stand at various points on the roof or ledges to see the sight lines and plausibility. Proper procedure is more often than not proactive, not reactive. If key leads hadn't been dropped, so for instance, vigorously pursuing the origin of that phone call, we might know who beckoned Rey from his home and why. Was it a work-related summons? If so, someone in that company knows and has kept a secret for 19 years. Procedurally, police could have used the power of a grand jury, or at least the pressure of persistent interviews, to break that silence. Likewise, imagine if police had dug into the note with the same fervor they dig into a suspect's manifesto in a homicide. The FBI helped decode its surface meaning, or lack thereof in this case, but did investigators attempt to correlate any names or phrases with real-life events or people in Ray's circle? Future reviewers of the case, like journalists and internet sleuths, they have done more analysis on the note content than the original detectives. Hindsight, always going to be 2020. It's easy to second guess an investigator after the fact. In 2006, BPD was dealing with a city that saw about 270 homicides that year. That's a heavy caseload. A case that looked like a suicide is not going to garner the resources that a clear-cut homicide would. And that's kind of a harsh reality that triaging happens. Investigators are human. They have hunches. They feel pressure to close cases. But sometimes you just have to have a little bit of extra stick-to-itiveness. Maybe they genuinely believe they were looking at an unfortunate suicide and that further effort would prolong a family's grief. One detective did later remark that he felt the family wanted it to be a homicide, but he personally thought there was no evidence supporting anything other than suicide. Once again, I would argue there's no evidence supporting anything at all. And it's possible that this detective thought he was doing the right thing by not dragging everyone through a prolonged investigation, but facts and not gut feelings should guide conclusions. And the facts were pretty far from conclusive. The consequences of the apparent procedural errors in this case is that we're left with an enduring mystery. If Ray truly was alone and truly chose to end his life in this elaborate manner, then the investigative missteps primarily did a disservice by allowing doubt and pain to fester for this family. And they really deserved a clear answer. Something backed by evidence, something that's not an assumption. However, if Ray's death was the result of foul play, some scheme or confrontation that ended with his fall, then those early missteps more than likely allowed whoever was responsible to get away with murder. In either scenario, strict adherence to proper procedures could have changed the course of this case. It very well could have proven that this was a suicide beyond a reasonable doubt, or uncovered evidence of a homicide that was missed. And then we may have had a resolution, not a puzzle. Ray's wife, Allison, has fought for years to keep the case in the spotlight, precisely because she senses the full truth was never uncovered. After the 2020 documentary episode aired, Baltimore police did release a statement saying they would review any new leads, but no major breaks have been reported. The Belvedere still stands, unchanged, silently guarding whatever secrets that night holds. In its walls and rooftop, only echoes remain of a single violent moment when a life was cut short. Cases like Rey Rivera's highlight why we in the true crime community harp on procedure and protocol. It's not bureaucratic nitpicking. It's because when someone dies under mysterious circumstances, the process of investigation is our voice for the voiceless. Every rule, treat it as a homicide, secure the scene, gather evidence, follow every lead, exists so that the victim can have their story told accurately when they can no longer speak. In Maryland specifically, the law entrusts these tasks to skilled professionals, and they expect diligence and impartiality. And when someone who's billed as a skilled professional is tasked with that investigation, and they fall short, even with the best intentions, the truth slips through the cracks and remains buried in the dark. Rey's story is a cautionary tale for investigators and a heartbreaking one for those who loved him. It reminds us that answers in forensic mysteries are very rarely served on a silver platter. They are hunted with rigor, an open mind, and a diligent respect for the process. And perhaps someday a new piece of evidence will surface, a witness, a confession, some forensic advancement that sheds light on what happened at the Belvedere in 2006. Until then, we're all going to be left with an uncomfortable truth. Not only the truth that we don't know about Rey's death, but the truth of how easily critical steps can be overlooked when a case is prematurely judged solved. Thank you for listening to Buried Episode 2. In our next episode, we are going to explore another case where procedure and justice collided. Until then, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the difference between truth and mystery can be as thin as following the rules.